Hello, Bell. Hello, others. Uh, Today's chapter is chapter 13, End of Summer. A trumpet has three little buttons, and they are for the fingers of the player of the trumpet. They look like this. That's what a trumpet looks like. See it? See, can you count them? There they are. By pushing them down in the right order, the player can produce all the notes of a musical scale and make beautiful music. Lewis had often examined these three little valves, but he never had been able to use them. He had three front toes on each foot, but being a water bird, he had webbed feet, and the webs in the feet prevented him from using his three toes by themselves. Kind of like what Barnegat has. He has webs, has fingers between, and Guinness has them too. Luckily, the valves on a trumpet are not needed for bugle calls because bugle calls are just a combination of do, mi, sol, and the trumpeter can play that without pressing down on any of the valves. Well, Lewis said, if I could just work those three valves with my three toes, I could play all sorts of music, not just bugle calls. I could play jazz, I could play country and western, I could play rock, I could play the great music of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Gershwin and Berlin and Brahms, everybody. I could really be a trumpet player, not just a camp bugler. I might even get a job with an orchestra. The thought filled him with ambition. Lewis loved music, and besides, he was already casting about for ways to make money after camp was over. Although he enjoyed life at Camp Couscous, Lewis often thought of his home on Upper Red Rock Lake in Montana. He thought about his parents and his brothers and his sisters, and about Serena. He was terribly in love with Serena, and he often wondered what was happening to her. At night he'd look up at the stars and think about her. In late evening, when the big bullfrogs were calling tronk across the still lake, he would think of Serena. Sometimes he would feel sad and lonely and homesick, but his music was a comfort to him. He loved the sound of his own trumpet. Summer passed all too quickly. On the last day of camp, Mr. Brickle called his counselors together, and he paid them all what he owed them. Lewis received his $100, the first monies that he ever earned by himself. Well, he had no wallet, no pockets. So Mr. Brickle placed the money in a waterproof bag that had a drawstring, like a baggie, and he hung the money bag around Lewis's neck, along with, do we know what's hanging there? The trumpet, the slate, the chalk pencil, and the life-saving medal for when he saved that apple guy. Lewis went to Sam Beaver's tent and found Sam packing up his things. Lewis took off his slate and pencil, and he wrote, I need another job. Where should I go? Sam sat down on his bed and thought for a while. Then he said, go to Boston. Maybe you can get a job with the Swan boat. Huh? Lewis had never been to Boston, but he had no idea what a swan boat was anyway. So he nodded his head, and on the slate he wrote, do me a favor. Sure, said Sam. Take a razor blade and slit the web on my right foot so I can wiggle my toes. And he held out his foot. What? Razor blades? Those are dangerous things to play with. And here, he said, why do you want to wiggle your toes, said Sam. You'll see, wrote Lewis. I need my toes in my new business. Well, Sam hesitated, and then he borrowed a razor blade from one of the older counselors. That's like a very sharp knife. It's very dangerous. We don't fool with those. If we see those, call somebody. We'll get it taken away. It won't hurt anybody. Sam hesitated, then he borrowed a razor blade, and he made a long, neat cut between Lewis's little toe and his big toe and the middle toe and the outer toe. Oops, he's cutting. Here is the picture of Sam cutting the toes, cutting the webbing between the toes. And you see Lewis? Lewis can't even look. He's scared. Does it hurt? Asked Sam. Lewis shook his head. He lifted his trumpet and he placed his toes on the valves and he played do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, la, ti, do. Sam laughed. The Swan boat will hire you. All right. You're a real trumpeter now, but with your web cut, swimming will be a bit harder. You'll have a tendency to swim around in circles because your left foot will swim better than your right foot. I can manage, said Lewis. Thanks very much for the surgery. The next day, the campers left. The canoes had all been hoisted onto racks in the boathouse. The float had been hauled out onto the beach, and the windows had been boarded up, and everything had been packed and zipped and snugged up for the winter. Of all the campers, only Lewis stayed behind. His flight feathers were growing fast, but he still couldn't fly. Plus, he had all that stuff hanging around his neck. He made up his mind he'd remain at camp all alone until he was able to take to the air again, and then he'd fly straight to Boston. The lake was lonely without the boys, but Lewis didn't mind being alone. For the next 3 weeks, he took it easy. He grew his flight feathers, dreamed with Serena by day and night, and practiced his trumpet. He had listened to music all summer. Several of the boys had radios and record players, and now he practiced those songs that he'd heard. And every day he got better and better. That's what practice does. One day he composed a love song for Serena, and he wrote the words and music on his slate. And it says, "Oh, ever in the greening spring, by bank and bough retiring, for love shall be soaring, and swans of my desiring." He wasn't too good at writing music. He was really thinking of Serena, but he left her name out of it and kept it a little impersonal. His plumage, his feathers, were beautiful now, and he felt great. On the 21st day of September, he tried his wings, and to his great relief, they lifted him off the ground. Lewis rose into the air. The trumpet banged against the slate knocked against the money bag, the life-saving metal clinked against the chalk pencil, but Lewis was in the air again. And he climbed and he climbed and he headed for Boston. It was wonderful to be in the sky again. Flying is a lot harder than it was before I acquired all these things around my neck, thought Lewis. The best way to travel is really to travel light. On the other hand, I have to have these things. I got to have a trumpet if I am to win Serena for my wife. I got to carry this money bag to hold the money to pay my father's debts. And I've got to hold a slate and pencil so I can communicate with people. And I ought to wear the medal because I really did save a life. And if I didn't wear it, people might think I was not grateful. On and on he flew toward Boston, which is the capital of Massachusetts. A lot of Democrats there. And it's famous for its baked beans, its codfish, its tea parties, its cabots. What are they? Boston cabots, huh? Lowell and Stallston, and its swan boats. What's a swan boat? Here's Lewis in the air with all the stuff around his neck. And that's the end of chapter 13.